I never expected to fight for something that was already mine. When my grandfather passed away last spring, I inherited his land, a quiet, untouched stretch of property just outside of Maplewood. For generations it had been in our family, a sanctuary away from the city's chaos. But life moved fast, and I hadn't been back in years, until now. The moment I turned onto the dirt road leading to the farmhouse, I knew something was wrong. Gone was the peaceful, overgrown path I remembered. In its place were deep tire tracks, survey markers, and a massive billboard planted right on my land. Future development site, exclusive gated community coming soon. I slammed the brakes. This had to be a mistake. Stepping out of my car, I scanned the horizon. Bulldozers sat in the distance, the earth freshly torn. Construction crews moved like ants, placing stakes, measuring, preparing. Then I saw her. A tall woman in a crisp white blazer stood among them, phone pressed to her ear. Even from here she radiated authority, the kind that came from knowing. No one could challenge her, Karen Monroe. I'd never met her, but I knew her name well. President of the Maplewood Homeowners Association, she controlled everything in this town. Who built what, where, and how much they paid for the privilege. And now, she was standing on my land. I marched toward her, gravel crunching beneath my boots. "Excuse me," I called. "What the hell is going on here?" Karen barely glanced at me before finishing her phone call. Then, adjusting her sunglasses, she gave me a smile so fake it might as well have been printed on a billboard. "We're preparing for phase 1 of our newest residential community," she said smoothly. "Did you need information about purchasing?" "A lot." I clenched my fists. "This is my land," I shot back. "I inherited it from my grandfather. No one sold anything." For the first time, her smile wavered. "That's interesting," she said, tilting her head. "The HOA finalized the purchase of this property last year. The county approved everything." "That's impossible," Karen sighed, as if dealing with a slow child. "Maybe your grandfather didn't tell you," she said. "The sale was finalized 11 months ago. We have all the paperwork." My stomach twisted. My grandfather had been sick in his final months, but his mind was sharp. He wouldn't have sold his beloved farm without telling me. "I want to see those documents," I said. Karen's patience thinned. She handed me a sleek business card. "Our legal team would be happy to provide the details," she said, "but I assure you, everything is in order." Then she turned away, already back on her phone. I stood there, fists clenched, watching as the machines continued to tear into my family's land. I didn't have to go far to find someone who could tell me the truth. As I pulled into the driveway of the farmhouse, I spotted an old man sitting on the porch next door. Mr. Green, my grandfather's longtime friend and neighbor. "Figured you'd show up eventually," he said, rocking back in his chair. I climbed the steps, tension tightening in my chest. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. Mr. Green sighed, nodding toward the construction site. "They're stealing from you," he said. "Karen Monroe and her people. They've been after this land for years." I frowned. "But my grandfather never sold it." "That's what he said too," Mr. Green replied. "But a few months before he passed, he started looking through the county records, told me something wasn't adding up." My pulse pounded. What did he find? The old man grabbed a dusty folder from beside him, opening it on the table. Inside were copies of property records, legal documents, and something else, a hand-drawn map. My grandfather had been digging into something he never got the chance to finish. I clenched my jaw. Karen Monroe thought she could steal from my family, thought she could get away with it because no one was around to stop her. She was wrong. She had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to find out. Karen Monroe thought she could brush me off. She thought I'd take her business card, grumble a little, and disappear like every other homeowner she'd steamrolled. She was wrong. The moment I stepped into my grandfather's farmhouse, I knew where I had to start. The house was just as I remembered. dust motes floating in the late afternoon light, the faint scent of pipe tobacco still clinging to the old wooden beams. Everything was exactly as he had left it. His boots sat by the door. His coat still hung on the hook, but his office, that's where the truth would be. I flicked on the desk lamp and pulled open the first drawer. If Grandpa had suspected something, he would have kept records. For hours, I sifted through stacks of papers, old bank statements, weather logs, crop yield reports from decades ago. Nothing. Then, just as frustration was setting in, my foot brushed against something, a loose floorboard. I knelt down, prying it open with my fingers. Inside the hidden compartment was a small, rusted metal box. And inside that box was the key to everything, the first clue, the map that didn't match. The first document I pulled out was a property survey from 1952, handwritten, yellowed with age, but unmistakable. It showed my grandfather's land as nearly 40 acres larger than what was currently recorded. I grabbed a more recent survey from the county website on my phone. The boundary lines were different, not slightly, drastically. Somewhere along the way, 40 acres had vanished. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had moved the lines, and if my grandfather had found this before he passed, I kept digging. The second clue, the forged document. The next paper made my stomach drop. It was a deed transfer from 11 months ago. Karen Monroe had been telling the truth. On paper, the HOA did own the land, but something was wrong. The signature at the bottom, the one that was supposed to be my grandfather's, wasn't his. I knew his handwriting. He had signed every birthday card, every Christmas note, every old farm document with the same steady, precise hand. This was a forgery, a crude attempt to mimic his signature, and the date, 11 months ago, was even more damning. My grandfather had been in the hospital recovering from a stroke that week. There was no way in hell he could have signed this. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my hands from shaking. This wasn't just a shady deal. This was fraud. The final clue. The letter he left me, at the very bottom of the metal box, tucked beneath old family papers. I found something else. A letter, addressed to me. My throat tightened as I unfolded the fragile paper. His handwriting. If you're reading this, it means they finally made their move. My pulse pounded in my ears. They've been after this land for years. I've turned down every offer, every pressure tactic, but I know they won't stop. And I won't always be here to fight them. I don't trust the county. I don't trust the HOA. I don't trust the men who suddenly care so much about where my property lines fall. I need you to do something for me. Go to the county records office, compare the original boundary maps to what's listed today. Someone's been playing games, and if I know these people, they didn't just move lines, they moved ownership. Don't let them take what's ours. I swallowed hard, gripping the letter so tightly my knuckles turned white. He knew, he had seen this coming, and now it was up to me to finish what he started. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on Karen Monroe's business card. She picked, up after 2 rings, her voice smooth and unbothered. "Well, that was quick," she said. "Finally coming to your senses." I forced a smile, even though she couldn't see it. "Actually, I just have a question," I said, keeping my tone light. "Did your legal team ever check my grandfather's signature? Or were they just hoping no one would?" A pause, a flicker of hesitation. Then she laughed, a short, amused sound. "You really think you're the first person to try and fight us?" she said. "Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. You can't win. You're one man. I have lawyers, I have the county, and I have a signed, sealed, and recorded deed. Doesn't matter what little scraps of paper you found in that old house of yours." My grip tightened around the letter. "Oh, I think it does," I said, "and something tells me a judge will agree." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Karen's voice lowered, her amusement gone. You don't know who you're dealing with, she said quietly. I smiled even though my blood was boiling. No, Karen, I said. You don't. Then I hung up. I had the proof. Now I just needed a lawyer and a plan. Karen Monroe thought she could intimidate me. She thought a few smug remarks and a forged signature would be enough to make me back down. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my grandfather's old wooden table, surrounded by papers, maps, and legal documents, piecing together my next move. If I was going to fight the Maplewood HOA, I needed two things, a lawyer and an army. Step 1. Find a lawyer who wasn't afraid of a fight by 8 a.m. I was standing outside the office of Walter Franklin, the most notorious real estate attorney in Maplewood. Walter was an old-school lawyer, gruff, sharp, and allergic to bullshit. He'd been practicing law for over 30 years and had built a reputation for hating corrupt officials. His secretary barely looked up when I walked in. "No walk-ins," she said, flipping through a file. I slid Karen Monroe's forged deed across the counter. "I think he'll want to see this," I said. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Walter in his cluttered office as he scanned the documents. Halfway through, he let out a low whistle. "This is bad," he muttered, "for them." I leaned forward. "So you believe me," Walter smirked. "Kid, this is textbook fraud. Forged signature, altered property lines, and—" He flipped to another page. A suspiciously fast approval process from the county. "Someone greased some wheels to push this through. Can we stop them?" I asked. Walter sat back, steepling his fingers. "We're filing an emergency injunction today," he said. "That'll freeze all construction on your land. Then we go after the HOA's financial records. If Karen's dirty, I guarantee we'll find it." I nodded. "Do it." Walter smiled. "You're not the first person to come to me with a story about Karen Monroe, but you might be the first to take her down." Step 2. Find the other victims. Karen had been running scams for years. Now I needed to find the people she had screwed over before me. I started knocking on doors. The first stop was Mr. Grayson, an old man who had once owned a small woodworking shop on the outskirts of town, until Karen's HOA fined him into bankruptcy. "She made my life hell," he said bitterly. "First it was my fence, then my storefront sign, then my parking space, fines, fees, penalties, until I couldn't afford to fight anymore. Next, I met Sarah Jenkins, a single mother who had been forced to sell her house after being fined for unauthorized landscaping. Her crime, planting a vegetable garden. She made up rules as she went," Sarah said. "If she didn't like you, she found a way to get rid of you." I took notes, documenting every name, every story, every stolen home. By the end of the day, I had over a dozen victims willing to talk. Now I just needed to make sure the whole town heard them. Step 3. Take the fight public first. I leaked the story to the press. I contacted Janet Rivera, an investigative journalist from the local newspaper. When I showed her the forged deed and the altered property records, her eyes widened. "This is huge," she said. "If you're right, Karen Monroe didn't just steal land, she built an empire on fraud." I nodded. "And I need your help exposing her." She grinned. "Oh, don't worry. This is front-page material." Next, I organized a town meeting, a public forum where everyone in Maplewood could hear the truth. We rented out the local community center, ironically, a building that sat on land Karen had stolen from my family. Flyers were printed, phone calls were made. By the time the meeting began, the place was packed. The showdown begins. Karen Monroe arrived late. She waltzed in like she owned the place, wearing her signature white blazer and a smirk that made my blood boil. The moment she saw Walter Franklin standing beside me, her smile faltered. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, stepping up to the microphone, "thank you for coming. I called this meeting because there's something you all need to know about the Maplewood HOA." I pulled out a stack of papers. "This is a forged deed," I said, holding it up. "It claims my grandfather sold his land to the HOA, but he never did. This signature is fake." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I turned to Karen. "Tell me, Karen, did you think no one would check?" Her smirk was gone now. "This is ridiculous," she said, stepping forward. "We have all the necessary approvals." "From county officials you bribed?" I cut in. Gasps rippled through the room. I slammed another paper onto the table. "This is a survey from 1952. It shows my grandfather's land was 40 acres larger than what's currently recorded. Someone in this room moved the property lines." Karen's face turned red. "This is slander. It's evidence," I shot back, "and it's already been filed in court." The crowd erupted. "Is this true?" someone shouted. "She stole my house," Sarah Jenkins called from the audience. "She forced me out of my business," Mr. Grayson added. The room turned against her fast. Karen tried to regain control, raising her hands. Now, let's not get emotional. Wrong move." People booed. I leaned into the microphone. "This isn't just about my land. It's about every person in this town who has been bullied, scammed, and stolen from." I gestured to the crowd. "If Karen Monroe and the Maplewood HOA have ever wronged you, stand up." One by one, they rose. First Sarah, then Mr. Grayson, then dozens more, an entire room of people standing against her. Karen took a step back, her confidence crumbling. She grabbed her phone, muttering something about her lawyers. But it was too late, because the next morning, her face was on the front page of the newspaper. "Maplewood HOA president under investigation for fraud." And the battle, it was just getting started. Karen Monroe was cornered, and she knew it. After the town meeting, the tides had turned. The people of Maplewood were finally seeing the truth. The fraud, the stolen land, the rigged system. My lawsuit had made headlines. The HOA was under investigation, and Karen's carefully crafted empire was starting to crumble. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. And Karen, she wasn't about to go down without a fight. The first strike. They cut me off. The morning after the meeting, I woke up to dead silence. No hum of the refrigerator, no running water, no power. I checked my phone, no service. Stepping outside, I found a bright orange notice nailed to my front door. Property. Violation, immediate compliance required. I ripped it down, scanning the fine print. Apparently, my farmhouse was suddenly uninhabitable due to electrical hazards, zoning infractions, and an expired septic permit. Bullshit! I grabbed my keys and drove into town, straight to the utility office. The clerk barely looked at me as she typed into her computer. "Looks like your water and electricity were shut off due to multiple code violations." I clenched my jaw. "My house has had the same wiring for 30 years, and my septic permit was renewed last year," she shrugged. "You'll have to file an appeal with the county board." I leaned in. "And who runs that board?" She hesitated. I already knew the answer. Karen's people. I exhaled slowly. They wanted to isolate me, make me uncomfortable, make me desperate. They thought this would scare me off. They were dead wrong. The smear campaign by noon, I got a call from Janet Rivera, the journalist covering my case. "You might want to check social media," she said. I pulled up my phone. Karen's people had launched a full-scale smear campaign. Posts, articles, even fake testimonials were flooding the local Facebook groups. Disgruntled grandson trying to extort our community. Fraudster. Caught falsifying documents, just like he accused the HOA of doing. Outsider looking to destroy Maplewood's future. I scrolled through hundreds of comments, some defending me, others calling me a liar, a criminal, even a scam artist. Then came the death threats. "You think you can take down Karen? Think again. Hope your house doesn't catch fire one night. Leave town before it's too late." My stomach twisted. This wasn't just intimidation, this was war. The bribe that evening. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of my farmhouse. Karen Monroe stepped out. I met her halfway, arms crossed, refusing to invite her inside. She sighed, removing her sunglasses. "Let's cut the bullshit," she said. "Agreed," I replied. She pulled out a checkbook. "I don't know what number you're expecting, but here's how this works." She flipped open the book and started writing. "You drop the lawsuit, you withdraw your claims, and you walk away." She held up the check, $500,000. I let out a low whistle. "That's a lot of money to make a problem disappear," I said. Her smile was cold. "Everyone has a price." I took the check, pretending to consider it. Then I ripped it in half. Karen's expression darkened. "This is a mistake," she said, voice low. "No, Karen," I said. "The mistake was thinking I could be bought." She let out a slow breath. "All right," she said, slipping on her sunglasses. "You had your chance." Then she turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive off, a bad feeling settling in my gut. She was done playing nice. Now she was going to play dirty, the final blow. The secret recording, that night, a miracle, landed in my lap. I was at Walter Franklin's office when his assistant rushed in, holding a USB drive. "You need to hear this," she said. I plugged it in, and as the audio played, my blood ran cold. It was Karen Monroe's voice, and it was a confession. The idiot still thinks he can win. "I don't care if the signature is fake. The county signed off, and that's all that matters. If he doesn't back off, we'll hit him with violations until he's drowning in fines. Maybe a little fire inspection. Maybe an accidental gas leak. The commissioner is already on board. Hell, the judge is in my pocket. This case is dead before it even starts." I sat back in shock. "This is it," I murmured. Walter grinned. "You bet your ass it is." The next morning, we filed the recording as evidence. By noon, the state attorney's office was involved. By nightfall, Karen Monroe's house was swarmed by investigators. And by the next morning, she was on the front page again. HOA president faces criminal charges, extortion, fraud, and conspiracy. The battle was nearly over. I had one move left to make. The final confrontation. Karen Monroe's empire collapsed overnight. The leaked recording was damning. It exposed her fraud, her backroom deals, and her corrupt alliances. The state attorney's office wasted no time. Within 24 hours, she was officially charged with real estate fraud, forgery, bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit extortion, and just like that, the Queen of Maplewood fell. The arrest, the morning of Karen's arrest, I made sure to be there. She was standing in her pristine driveway, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Her white blazer was wrinkled, her sunglasses gone. As the officers cuffed her hands behind her back, she spotted me watching. Even then, she tried to regain control. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I smiled. "Karen, I didn't just win. I buried you." She opened her mouth to respond, but an officer pushed her toward the squad car. The last thing I saw before the door shut was the panic in her eyes. She had spent years ruining people's lives. Now, she was the one losing everything, cleaning up the mess. With Karen gone, the HOA crumbled. The county launched an internal investigation, uncovering more fraud, more bribery, and more stolen land. Several of Karen's business partners resigned, in disgrace. The judge she had in her pocket suspended, the county commissioner facing his own legal troubles, and the people of Maplewood. They were finally free. I worked with Walter Franklin to ensure that every victim got justice. Mr. Grayson got his woodworking shop back. Sarah Jenkins received financial restitution for the home she lost. The families who had been forced out, they got legal ownership restored. Every wrong Karen had committed was undone. And as for my land, mine. Completely, permanently. The sweetest justice. A month later, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun set over the fields, when a familiar face appeared at the end of my driveway. It was Gerald Fisher. Karen's former HOA treasurer. I stood as he approached, his once arrogant demeanor now defeated, desperate. "Please," he said, voice shaky. I need help." I crossed my arms. "You mean after everything you did? After everything you let happen?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't know how deep it went." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't stop you from cashing the checks, did it?" He looked away, ashamed. "I lost everything," he muttered. "My savings, my reputation. My house is going into foreclosure." Ah, there it was. The same man who once enforced Karen's cruel fines, who had helped steal homes from innocent families, was now begging for mercy. Poetic. I studied him for a long moment. Then I shrugged. "Not my problem," I said simply, turning. "Back toward my house," Gerald stammered. But I paused at the door, glancing back one last time. "My grandfather once told me," I said, voice calm, "don't ever let anyone take what's yours." Then I shut the door behind me. Justice had been served, and Maplewood would never be the same again.